want to welcome you to the Salt Lake City Planning Commission meeting for May 28th, 2025. Please note the public meeting rules posted at the entrance to this room or in Section D of the Planning Commission Policies and Procedures. We've received comments that you've made, that you've submitted either to the planner or to your community organization prior to this meeting. If you want to make a comment this evening, you can fill out a comment card, which is found near the door of this room, or you can send an email to planning.commission@slc.gov. Okay, the first thing on our agenda this evening is a report of the chair. So we have some new commission members at their first meeting this evening, so I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. First, Jeff Barrett.
Great, thank you. Welcome. My name is Jeff Barrett. Hi, Laura. I have an interesting educational and professional background that I'd like to share briefly. So I got a master's in urban and environmental planning from the University of Virginia nearly 20 years ago, I guess 17 or 18 years ago. But since then haven't much put that background to use. I've been involved in the energy and utility business. I ran Governor Herbert's energy office for 5 years, went on to work at Rocky Mountain Power, where I was in regulation and then in local government affairs. During that time, I worked closely with the city. I was the company's point person for the city council, the mayor, all the department heads, Laura Briefer over there, and worked with them closely on everything from economic development, wildfire mitigation, things that we were doing, all kinds of projects that we were up to. Energy, the city's energy policy and how to facilitate that. I was very involved with that in the early days. So that's my background. I am now at a company called Apex Clean Energy. We're a large utility scale wind and solar developer, and I represent them at state legislatures across the Western United States and state public utilities commissions. So that's my background. I live in the 9th and 9th neighborhoods of District 5, have a couple of kids at Emerson Elementary School, and I'm happy to be here, looking forward to contributing.
Thank you. We also have a new commissioner, Michael Vella. If you'll introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Vella. I got my first degree in architecture in 1975, then a master's degree in 78 from the great University of Texas. I've been with HKS Architects for, sound like a kid, for 39 and a half years. And let's see, I opened up the Salt Lake City regional office in 1999. We have a diversity of clients, the Intermountain Healthcare, the LDS Church, BYU, Boyer, Ed Lewis with our newest the Astra Tower. It's been a diverse practice that we have. And so I have been on the Historic Landmark Commission for 1.5 terms, so that's right at just under 6 years, and I'm excited to be here on the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome you to this, your first meeting, and look forward to talking to you about these things. I want to recognize this is the last meeting for Bree Shear, Commissioner Shear, who served for 8 years on the Salt Lake City Planning Commission. She was recently profiled as a legend by AIA Utah Magazine, because she is. She was a Loeb Fellow at Harvard, Department Director for the City of Boston, a professor, business owner, a parent, the Dean of the U of U College of Architecture and Metropolitan Planning. She grew that program to include design as well. She's been a friend and a mentor for me and a brain of this operation for a long time. She's maybe the only person we know who's a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners and American Institute of Architects. So it's the benefit that we've had from Commissioner Shear serving with us for 8 years has been immeasurable. So I wanted to say that we appreciate your work and we'll miss you. And do you want to say anything? The last report of Commissioner Shear.
No, but yes, I do. I guess I want to say that public service is something that the city, the county, the state all need. And I thank all of you commissioners for doing this. And I consider the civic commitment that's extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you. Come back and make a comment. You'll have 2 minutes anytime you want. You stand in line and talk for 2 minutes. That's it. No, that's not a thing. That's it for me. Do we have a report from the vice chair?
I have nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a report from the planning director?
No, we don't have anything tonight.
Okay, thank you. Now it's time for the open forum where commissioners can discuss planning, zoning, and general land use items that are not listed on the agenda. There's no public discussion associated with this item, and this is where we have 10 minutes set aside for this. This is where we like to discuss, instead of talking about specific things that we want to change or things we wonder about or don't like, instead of talking about those during a specific application, we talk about them during the open forum. Or if you want training on something. And we have some open things that we've requested training on in open forum, which are still to come. So get yourself ready for next time if you don't have anything this time. Anybody? Okay, thank you. All right, now we're on the consent agenda, and these are matters which we anticipate will require limited discussion. We have 2 items on the consent agenda tonight: an extension request for 2020 Main townhomes at approximately 2020 South Main Street, and planned development at approximately 377 East, 2100 South. The outcome that we can have tonight on the consent agenda, we can approve all the items on the consent agenda or move something off of the consent agenda to the regular agenda. I'm going to open the public hearing for the planned development request. So if anybody wants to speak about 377 East, 2100 South, you can approach the podium. Do we have any new emails this evening about that? No. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing on the consent agenda items and ask for a motion from the Planning Commission.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve consent agenda items from Commissioner Christensen and a second from Commissioner Krasik. Any activity to be taken on that motion? Okay, let's vote. Commissioner Leverett.
I've been in so many meetings this week, I forgot what we're doing. Aye. Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Vella.
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer.
Yes.
Commissioner Krasik.
Yes.
Commissioner Berry.
Yes.
Commissioner Mike Christensen.
Yes.
Commissioner Scott.
Yes.
And Commissioner Barrett.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the consent agenda items pass. Oh, I will also vote yes. Passes unanimously. So now we're on a work session for the Salt Lake City Water Master Plan. Just come on up and introduce yourself and give us your presentation on that.
So Laura, if you right here, sorry, if you have if you want to share your presentation, sit in front of the laptop, and you're going to open the file that says Laura.
Oh, okay. I do have a presentation, but first I wanted to introduce myself to those of you who I don't know or who may not know me. I'm Laura Briefer, and I'm the Director of Salt Lake City Public Utilities Department. We're
Laura, you need to speak really close to the microphone for everyone to hear you.
All right, thank you. Okay, that's better. I'm the Director of the Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities. We are a large city department that operates water, wastewater, sanitary sewer, and street lighting systems for Salt Lake City and other communities within Salt Lake County. I've been in this role for 9 years now and have actually worked for this department for 17. and have a 30-year career path in environmental and natural resource management. So I know I look a lot younger than that, but just kidding. And so thank you so much for having me here. I'm just going to open up this presentation. So I want to talk a little bit about how we plan for the future for Salt Lake City's water supplies. We have a very, very long history of planning for long-range water supplies, dating back to the first water right, the first diversion of our modern-day water system in July 1847. That was our City Creek diversion. To a massive amount of planning in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s that have essentially developed the infrastructure and the water resources systems that we rely upon today. So the work we currently do on our long-range planning sits on the shoulders of a lot of our predecessors, and I thank them every day for the amazing work that they've done to set us up for the future. So just a recap of our work, I like to say we manage water from the tops of the Wasatch Mountain watersheds to Great Salt Lake, to Utah Lake, to the Jordan River, in all of the different water utilities that we run, whether it's drinking water, drainage and flood control, or sanitary sewer. So we are pretty lucky in that we can often take a one water approach in our water management. Today, though, I'm going to be talking primarily about our drinking water system and about the ways in which we manage our long-range planning for that system. As I mentioned earlier, we do provide drinking water to all of Salt Lake City, and also most of Mill Creek, Holiday, Cottonwood Heights, and small portions of Murray, Midvale, and South Salt Lake. So we have a very large water service area that now serves close to 400,000 people and growing. There are a lot of reasons why we conduct long-range water planning. One of the biggest ones is that our conditions are always changing around us, so we do a lot of iterative planning. Examples of changing conditions include the physical and environmental systems themselves that we rely upon, legal and regulatory changes. We're a very, very heavily regulated sector under multiple federal and state laws. Growth patterns change constantly, and public values around water changes a lot too. When I first started working for this department, I was told by a person in our community that any water that we don't use goes to waste in Great Salt Lake. That we've had a huge change in public values around Great Salt Lake and around water conservation and water efficiency. And then we do have a lot of risk factors that change that affect our water resources as well, and I'll get into those in a little bit too. Our understandings of the world around us change too. We gain a lot of knowledge every day that we operate our water systems, and we are constantly looking at new approaches and how those are managed. So some examples of our understandings changing includes our understandings around climate change, and for instance, some water quality issues such as nutrients or pharmaceutical impacts. The photo I show here on this harmful algal bloom from 2016 that encompassed about 90% of the surface area of Utah Lake, that was a pretty significant impact to Salt Lake City. A lot of people don't realize that we hold water rights in Utah Lake that are directly related to the water that we drink. We don't drink Utah Lake water, but those water rights satisfy long-standing exchange agreements dating back to 1888, where the water resources that we do rely upon for drinking water are connected to. So that's just an example of something that we hadn't really seen before, with the impacts that we've now created plans and contingency plans around. So what are the things that we address in our long-range plans? The one I'm going to talk about today is our future water supply and demand, but we have a lot of connected issues and topics that we integrate into that long-range water supply and demand planning that include climate change, population growth and land use changes, major stressors such as Great Salt Lake, water quality needs and regulation, our infrastructure, including the aging infrastructure that we have as a city, and then again, that public engagement and that public value around water. This is a photo of Big Cottonwood Creek, which is one of our major water supplies. So we prepare on a regular and iterative basis many different types of plans that we implement. The one I'm going to talk to you about today is the one in bold on this slide, which is water supply and demand through the year 2060. But we also have plans related to conservation and drought contingency, a lot of planning related to our watershed management in the central Wasatch Mountains, where our sources of drinking water come from, water quality, climate vulnerability and adaptation, where we are working on long-range studies and research with the University of Utah and our, it was the climate adaptation planning group run by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is perhaps not as active now as it used to be, but that's something that we work on a lot too. Infrastructure plans, so capital improvement planning, and right now our focus is really on aging infrastructure. We're the oldest water provider west of the Mississippi River, and we have some of the oldest infrastructure. I just went through our budget process and a rate study process, for instance, to replace some major infrastructure like treatment plants. And that financial strategy and rate study is a really big piece of taking care of that aging infrastructure. We also have public engagement plans and strategies and public policy strategies. So we're also very active on the state and national level related to water policy. I screenshotted an article from a couple years ago where we started exploring gifting some water, about 35 million gallons of water a day to Great Salt Lake. That's our treated wastewater. When I get a little further in this presentation and talk about water reuse, wastewater reuse, that comes into play in this conversation as well. So the drivers for our 2060 water supply and demand plan, this is looking out to the year 2060 with respect to demands and supply, really were some significant land use changes and growth. When we started our 2060 plan, the Utah State Correction Facility was relocated to our service area, which is essentially a town of 5,000 that we hadn't planned on before. The inland port was established. We were seeing the beginnings of a lot of increased densification that we're still seeing that right now. And our best estimates of residential population growth by 2060 are about 20 to 25%. We were also seeing some new regulatory requirements surrounding water rights that would affect the city, as well as some new regulations around source sizing, which really means like how much water per capita per day when we talk about new development. And then finally, when we started planning for 2060, this was in about 2019, we also had some updated climate change information on the national level with an updated climate assessment, and then a lot of additional local research on climate. So we wanted to make sure to incorporate that new information into a long-range plan. The picture you see on the left here, that is an outline of our water service area. And then overlaid on that, you'll see the light blue line, which is the new Inland Port Authority, or it was new at the time we started the plan, as well as some additional industrial zoned areas. So essentially in our 2060 long-range plan, we look at different components. And one of those components is trying our best to, with a lot of data to understand what future water demand is going to look like. So we use a lot of information to try to project that. One of those, of course, is zoning and land use maps. We use census data, and then we use the Wasatch Front Regional Council's transportation analysis zones to project that future population and demand. Our demand planning includes residential, non-residential, which is like commercial, industrial, and institutional uses, and then irrigated areas of our system. And then we do take a scenario-based approach as well. When we're estimating water demand, we want to look at the different levels of conservation on the system. So in the 2060 plan, we looked at 4 different scenarios. One was kind of a status quo scenario, which would have us meeting what was the historic state water conservation goal. And then we had 3 different scenarios of progressively more aggressive conservation. And we select what we think would be a reasonable and conservative demand planning, because we also want to have some redundancy on our system. So on our water demand planning, we chose the scenario 2, which is more conservation than we're seeing now, and would require some additional investment into water conservation programs, but not quite as aggressive as scenario 3. I did include a chart on this slide that kind of shows what it would mean to implement, for instance, a scenario 2 means that 95% of faucets and showers are converted to high efficiency, or 80% of toilet and washing machines, or in addition to 80% of toilet and washing machines being converted to high efficiency, a 30% reduction in indoor leaks, an irrigation efficiency of 80%, and a reduction in high water use turf by 40%. When we talk about demand scenarios like that, we're not saying that we think we should stop at scenario 2 and that we shouldn't be more aggressive in the future. It's just we want to be as safe as possible when we're talking about matching the available supplies to the demand and what might be reasonable. A demand scenario 3 would require some very, very significant investment and regulation that we would need time to implement. And this is just what it would look like on a chart. So what this chart shows, on the X axis, we have the years, so starting 1990 out to 2060. And on the Y-axis, we have annual production of water in acre-feet metrics, and this is on an annual basis. The red line is what our demand has been since 1990. You can see that generally trends down. And then we have the different conservation scenarios out to 2060 in the large dash, small dash, and dotted lines. And then we have a recommended planning scenario, which is that scenario 2 out to the year 2060. And again, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't conserve more, but it's the planning scenario we use to make sure that we identify where we might need to make additional improvements on the system. So once we develop our projections of water demand based on all of those factors and those scenarios, we then look at the status of the water supplies that the city holds. So we look at our existing water sources, which we're lucky, it's a mix of water sources. So we have water from where the city directly holds water rights from City Creek, Parley's Creek, Mill Creek, Big Cottonwood Canyon, and Little Cottonwood Canyon, as well as groundwater rights. Those are incredibly valuable to the city because of our direct ownership of those water rights. We also have very important stakes and partnerships in 2 federal projects, and that's the federal Provo River project, that's the water that's stored in Deer Creek Reservoir, and then the Central Utah project as well. So we look at all of those existing water sources. We look at the water sources that we have not yet developed, which includes some additional groundwater sources where we hold water rights, and Mill Creek, where we hold water rights. And then we take a risk-based and redundancy approach to our water supply planning. So we look at the risks of having year-over-year drought and dry years, again, climate change. And then we look at different types of supply interruptions, which could be a sudden interruption that has a minor effect on our water supply, a major or catastrophic supply interruption, so that would be the equivalent of losing Big Cottonwood Creek from our supply, which is about 20% of our supply. And then an emergency supply interruption, which could be anything from a natural hazard event or infrastructure issues over time. We look at the projected average of production based on many, many, many years of data that we've kept on flows from those sources. And then the dry year production also based on data over dry years. And the planning that we do is on the dry year, so the historic dry year, when we think about what might be available to us. And it kind of looks like this when it's stacked on a chart. So again, on the x-axis, we have 1990 to the year 2060. And then on the y-axis, we have annual production from each source in acre feet. So the bottom light blue would be those surface water sources in which we hold direct water rights. And then we have in the orange and green some of our groundwater sources where we hold water rights. And then the dark blue is the preferred storage through the Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy. That's that Provo River project and Central Utah project, or that's actually the Provo River project water rights. We also show future water sources where the city we know we have access to those water rights and water resources, and that includes new groundwater wells, potentially wastewater reuse, but we are thinking about that in different ways because of a declining Great Salt Lake and because all of our wastewater is discharged to Great Salt Lake. Up a pretty big flow to Farmington Bay. And then additional surface water, which is that Mill Creek source. And then we overlay on that the recommended supply planning scenario, and then a planning scenario that bakes into it some water supply redundancy in case we lose a source of water. You can see by this chart, actually out to the year 2060, that we're starting to get very close to the maximum of our water supplies in that dry year scenario, and that we're going to need to develop some of those additional sources of water in order to meet projected demand. And that's basically our findings, where our supplies will be adequate to meet those projected demands, but only if the following occur. One is that we have additional water conservation efforts, and that those are implemented and effective, that we develop those additional sources of water that we've outlined. In our findings, we've assumed a climate factor of a net 10 to 20% change to any combination of increased water demand or reduced supply. So I included that last bullet 3 just because we're going to be embarking on our next 40-year plan pretty soon, where we're going to be taking another look at climate change and how climate will affect our long-range demand and supplies, because we have new information there that we'd like to include and new data we'd like to include. Without additional conservation, we would need somewhere around the range of 26,000 to 46,000 additional acre feet a year on top of the sources that we use and have anticipated developing. And I'll just move back a slide to say that that's a big chunk, because on that y-axis, you'll see that our annual production is currently around between 80,000 and 100,000 acre feet. And we're looking, based on growth projections, some additional needs. 26,000 acre feet is a large proportion of that. So I think that underscores how important additional conservation and sustained additional conservation is going to be for us in the long range. And that's the end of my slides. I do have some resources, and happy to answer any questions or have a discussion here. We have a lot of great resources on our website. And then one of the best forecasting and climate information resources, if you're interested, for the Intermountain West is through the Intermountain West Climate Dashboard that's hosted by the University of Colorado, in which the University of Utah also partners with. So thank you.
Thank you. If you have any questions or want to have a discussion, you can.
I don't have, first off, thank you very much. This is very useful information. I don't have a question. It's mainly just a comment, and it's probably something that you already know. You know, our firm has 30 offices and worldwide, and the only reason I bring that up is when I get together with my counterparts at, you know, office managers and partners at other parts of the United States and even in the world, invariably the question comes up is, tell me about Great Salt Lake. You know, I read an article that, I saw, you know, something on TV that, you know, and it's always coming up, and it's a hot topic. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's absolutely vital for us here, but it's, you know, the world is watching, you know, what's going on with Great Salt Lake, because even in the 26 years that I lived here, mm-hmm. it's you know, I remember when the kids were small going to Antelope Island. Yeah. When it was actually surrounded by water, and it's every year it seems less and less so. So your notion of new water sources and conservation are absolutely spot on. So, yeah. Thank you.
Great Salt Lake is a very serious issue, and for Salt Lake City and other communities in the Great Salt Lake Basin, it's a very large basin, but for our communities that rely on water that we divert from the Great Salt Lake Basin, so most of our water resources would flow to Great Salt Lake, we not only have a moral imperative, but it's something that we need to really include in our long-range planning. And the plan that I presented to you that we started in 2019, it didn't include Great Salt Lake as essentially a customer on the system, right? I think in future plans, we're going to have to find a way to do that. And this last year, I actually advocated for some legislation which would have allowed public water systems like ours to include a section on planning for Great Salt Lake in our long-range water supply and demand plans. These 40-year plans are actually required under state statute. And part of why they're used is to show the state that we have plans for the water rights that we hold to meet current and future demand so that we don't forfeit those water rights. It would have been, I think it would be very valuable to be able to include Great Salt Lake in that. There's a lot more discussion that needs to happen around that, but that's something that we're talking about including both in this plan and in our water conservation plan. Thank you.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about transmission and how that affects our conservation. Do you think we, you were talking about the aging infrastructure. So 2 points about that. Is there any loss in the infrastructure now that would help us to meet our water goals?
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner. So pretty much every water system on the planet has some loss in their transmission systems. I think it can range anywhere from 8% to up, depending on the status of the system. Salt Lake City has some water loss on our system, and we just completed a water loss audit so that we can better understand what that loss is. The audit raised more questions than answers for us because we also discovered that our water loss may not be due to system, but due to other things that may make it difficult for us to account for water use. So, for instance, if someone's not using a meter like they should, or so theft of water, or things like when we have a lot of development on the system and a lot of line flushing has to happen. So those types of things. So we're going to be narrowing in on that, but part of our infrastructure plan, our aging infrastructure plan, is addressing areas of our system where we can improve efficiency. It's very important.
I was just at a meeting this morning about the Olympics and the potential for infrastructure improvements through Olympics. Just speed it up and improve it now. Is there any potential for our water plan, especially regarding the lake, if we sort of fold it into the whole idea of this would help the lake? Mm-hmm. Is there any potential there that we're exploring?
Yeah, I mean, we would love to do all of those projects all at once. Unfortunately, our funding is based on water rate. I mean, fortunately and unfortunately, but based on water rates. We don't receive property tax or other sources of revenue for funding, so we always have to be really sensitive that we're prioritizing infrastructure based on what the community can afford in their water bill. And so, for instance, right now we're focusing on the repair and replacement of water treatment plants that were built in the 1950s. We have some of the oldest treatment plants in the state, and we need to take care of them. But those are high cost. That's high cost infrastructure to replace in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And so we have a plan where we're taking care of that, and then we're going to be transitioning over to things like the horizontal infrastructure, the pipelines, and we're still doing a percentage of our pipelines every year, but we'll probably focus a lot more on those once we finish with some of these great big treatment plant projects.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
I guess can you just try to paint a little bit of a clearer picture to me of what the largest obstacles to conservation are? Is it a financial barrier that there's just not enough money, or is it like a public zeitgeist of people are not caring enough, or just kind of help me understand what is the biggest barrier to that conservation happening? So
first of all, I'll say that our community, the Salt Lake community, has done quite good on conservation. Since the year 2000, while our population has grown about 15%, the overall amount of water we've used has decreased by 30%. That's system-wide. So as we've grown, we've become more efficient. And I think over time, the community ethic has definitely changed or transformed, where the ethic around water, the values around water have definitely helped our conservation programs. Our programs are primarily voluntary. Right now, we do have regulation that we can implement if needed. And I think one of the barriers is just the appetite for a regulatory approach. I don't know that it's necessary because we've achieved so much conservation, but to get to those much more aggressive levels will probably be more of a mixture. And then I think another potential barrier for some households, if we're just talking about on a single-family residential level, is dealing with irrigation systems, outdoor irrigation systems, and landscape. The barrier for them could be cost. Some of those things are expensive to deal with, so we're exploring some options of how we might partner with our community on things like that. And then I think, it's just constant education. Many times people don't know where their water comes from. The infrastructure's out of sight and out of mind. It's difficult to connect that mountain stream to your faucet to Great Salt Lake. And so public engagement, I can't emphasize enough how important public engagement is to reduce barriers to water efficiency and conservation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have one comment to say, in my neighborhood, there's a leak that's been going on for about 5 years, and we have repeatedly reported it to public utilities, and unfortunately, it never seems to have anything done about it. I guess on the bright side, the water does go into a storm drain and into the Great Salt Lake, but it is a little bit frustrating to see water rates going up when we can't get public utilities to fix a leak.
If you wouldn't mind sending me the address of the leak, that would be great. I can look into that and get back to you.
One other thing, I live in townhomes where we have 92 townhomes. We have our clubhouse, our pool, and our landscaping all on one water meter. And we have realized that it's not, basically there's no motivation for people to conserve when water's metered in that way. So that's something that I hope that Salt Lake City can change in the future.
Yeah, we're actually just submitted an ordinance change to the city council where we can require irrigation meters so that you're not sharing your culinary or your water meter with what's happening on your landscape, which would be a big step in that direction. But there could be other options, such as sub-metering. We want to get away from some of the development practice of putting large multifamily developments on that 1 meter, especially when that 1 meter serves both the landscape and the homes, because also our sewer rate structure is changing, which might incentivize that, because in the past that sewer rate was on annual winter consumption, and now it's going to be on 70% of your overall water use. And so an incentive might be there for folks to put in that irrigation meter, and we'd also be happy to talk with you about what that might look like.
Good,
Thanks.
thank you.
I see the role that the land use tables have, or the land use plans, like all of the general plan and all of that kind of stuff in your planning. So I think that's, like we've talked a lot about updating some of our neighborhood plans and stuff like that, and it's updating land use tables and stuff like that. I just see how that's an important part of the information you use too.
Yeah, we work so closely with the planning division of the city, and we got together a couple of years ago in a pretty concentrated workshop through the Growing Water Smart program. And I think in April, Director Norris gave a presentation on that Growing Water Smart process. One of the requirements under state law now is that general plans have that water element, and there's some very prescriptive components of that water element. And so one of the things we've been doing is looking at data around what kinds of water footprint, what are we seeing in the current data, aside from what our projections have been around the different water footprint different zones might have and different types of land uses.
So I was hoping you could help me gauge the appropriateness of my anxiety when I see you talk about drilling new wells for groundwater. There was some coverage in the last couple of days about groundwater in the Intermountain West. I admit to not having read it in any depth, but I'm also remembering that in sort of maybe the North Salt Lake area, somewhere up there were subsidence issues. So could you help me understand? Are you very reticent to drill those wells? Is it a last, or is it appropriate for reasons that you can help me understand?
Yeah, so it might be good to understand the way that Salt Lake City uses groundwater. So we use groundwater to supplement our surface water sources during the peak demand part of the season, so during the summertime. We don't use very much groundwater at all as a static source. And we also try to rely more on groundwater during drought years and give the aquifer a rest during more normal years. So you'll see our overall groundwater use fluctuates based on the climate. There is a sustainable yield of the aquifer that we draw on, and so we work closely with the State Department of Natural Resources on that too. We're not the only entities, though, that draw from that aquifer, and so it's really important to have that statewide view of, what's Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District drawing from, what's the City of Murray drawing from, and is it still within that sustainable yield where we're not mining the groundwater.
I do have one more kind of question. It's a little bit in the weeds, but you're here, and I thank you for being here. We are always dealing with land use and housing, and this is a little bit anecdotal, but I've heard that there is some reticence in your department to allow lot splitting because the trickiness of having multiple units connected to one water hookup. And while that there is some logistically that seems difficult, lot splitting seems like a path towards home ownership that, according to a recent report from the Ken Gardner Institute, 95% of current renters are locked out of home ownership right now in Utah. So being able to cut the land cost by dividing it into smaller parcels potentially allows for some people to be able to afford housing. So I'm just curious, is there a path forward? And also, this is anecdotal in that I am hearing this through a grapevine and not directly from the source. So is there reticence for lot splitting, and is there a path forward on that?
Yeah, my department's not reticent on lot splitting. Perhaps what you're hearing is related to the fire line issue and shared utilities. And so city ordinance right now does not allow there to be a shared line between the fire line and the line that feeds the home, just because we always want that fire line to be active. If for some reason the water is turned off to the home there's multiple different reasons why, often for non-payment, the fire line is still free to fight fires for the home. And that's currently in city ordinance. We've been asked by, I think, one architect to look to see if there are alternatives to that issue. But if you're talking about two different property owners sharing a line, a water line and or a sewer line, that can become problematic too, because who has the responsibility for maintaining that private part of the line? And so it's definitely something that we'd be willing to talk about with, a group of stakeholders to better understand what the problem is that needs to be solved or worked on, and see if there are creative solutions. But you might be hearing frustration around the fact that our ordinance is pretty cut and dry, and we're not able to make those kinds of adjustments too. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Anything else? Thank you, Ms. Briefer. Thanks for speaking us this evening.
Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, we're on to our regular agenda items. Number 6 is a request for partial street vacation at approximately 1101 West, 400 South. The planner's Andy Hulka. If you'll introduce yourself and the application.
Thank you. Give me just one moment to pull up the slides. Okay, great, thank you. So I'm Andy Hulka. I'll be your planner tonight for this item. It's a partial street vacation at 1101 West, 400 South. Property owner Eric Sansom submitted a request to Salt Lake City to vacate or give up public ownership of a portion of the public right-of-way adjacent to his property on the corner of 4th South and 11th West. The property's in the R1 5000 residential single-family district. It's just across the street from Franklin Elementary School near the Jordan River Trail on 4th South. The area in question that's proposed to be vacated is the area in yellow on the aerial view. It's approximately 5 feet between where the current property line is and the back of sidewalk. A little bit of background on this request. So there's an existing structure on the property. It was built in 1906. It's currently vacant. And the applicant is requesting this partial street vacation to facilitate future development of the property. They want to build a new single-family residence. Last year in 2024, they submitted a request for variance from the setback standards to allow the development that they're interested in building. That was ultimately denied. And so that's why this request is before you tonight. Since the variance was denied, they're requesting to vacate that portion of the right-of-way to give a little bit of extra buildable area to the lot. So when we review right-of-way vacation standards, the state code establishes the power for cities to vacate streets upon the request of the property owner. The city council has to hold a public hearing to determine that good cause exists for the vacation and to determine whether the public interest or any person will be materially injured by the proposal. In Salt Lake City, all street vacations must comply with the standards of 14.52, which requires petitions to meet at least one of the listed standards on the screen. In this case, the applicant's narrative points to a lack of use as the applicable standard. Let's take a closer look at the context of this street. Since this is a corner lot, it's got two street frontages. On 4th South, 4th South or Poplar Grove Boulevard is a city arterial street with 106-foot wide right-of-way. There were a few concerns brought up by staff during our review regarding this portion of the request. Engineering has a preference of keeping a consistent right-of-way width across the entirety of any corridor to just to facilitate maintenance, potential future improvements. And then Transportation also in their review noted that the 4th South Viaduct Trail is just about 2 blocks from this subject property. On the screen, I've got just an image from the project page showing the start of that new trail. This is a proposed 2-way mixed-use path that starts at 9th West and then proceeds across the freeway and over the rail lines into downtown towards Pioneer Park. That project is scheduled to begin construction this summer. And so with that in mind, Transportation's recommendation was to preserve as much right-of-way as possible on 4th South to just allow more options in the future if that trail is ever extended. The context on 11th West is a little bit different. This is a local street about 66 feet wide. It's a dead-end street that leads to the Neighborhood House Riverside Adult Day Center. This section also includes some a retaining wall and some stairs that are a little bit more significant obstructions in that area. You can see took this picture on the sidewalk looking north on 11th West and tried to kind of illustrate where the property line currently is and where it's proposed to be moved. Unlike 4th South, in this case, there are no future improvements planned, and since this is a dead end, any reduction to the right-of-way would still be a consistent width along this block face. So based on those reasons, because of the different contexts and due to the review comments that we received during the routing period for this application, staff is recommending approval of the request to vacate the portion of right-of-way on 11th West, and we are recommending that you forward a recommendation of denial for the request to vacate that portion along 4th South. It's a legislative item, so it requires City Council approval. The Planning Commission tonight is making a recommendation. You can recommend approval of the entire request or partial approval as staff is recommending, or denial. I have the recommended motion on the screen, and I think that's all that I have for you. Yep, thank you.
Thank you. We would like to hear from the applicant now. You can introduce yourself, and you have 10 minutes to make a presentation.
Push the button here. Well, thank you for hearing us out tonight. I did give you guys a copy of my statement. I thought I only had 5 minutes, so it was pretty solid at 5, but I can do 10. This is Jason Seaton. We're actually co-owners of the property. First, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Andrew for helping us not only with this vacation request, but also our prior variance request last year. As Andrew well knows, it's been over 2 years that we've been attempting to build a new home on this lot. Starting with the planning department and realizing that rebuilding as it sits today was not an option. We attempted a variance, which ultimately, as he stated, was denied, which brings us to this meeting. To vacate, hopefully, the property between our property line and the sidewalk on 11th West and 4th South. To just go over a couple points in the staff report, it states that they found that the street vacation to, quote, neither support nor violate any policy or goal found in the West Side Master Plan. I would tend to disagree with that statement when the entire scope of the project is considered. According to the West Side Master Plan, it states, quote, the private sector is comprised of developers and property owners who will design and build the new residential developments, commercial buildings, office parks, and other projects on private property that meet the development regulations, policies, and goals of the city and this plan. It continues on and later states one of its goals as promoting reinvestment and redevelopment in the West Side community through changes in land use, improved public infrastructure, and community investment to spur development that meets the community's vision while maintaining the character of the West Side's existing stable neighborhoods. Our plan of rebuilding this property from the ground up, I believe, directly coincides with the portion that states property owners who will design and build new residential developments and other projects on private property. Also, the goal to spur development that meets the community's vision while maintaining the character of Westside's existing stable neighborhoods. We are private property owners who wish to design a new home that meets current building codes and that maintains the character of the Westside's existing neighborhoods. The problems we've run into in our endeavors stem from the fact that our property, being built almost 120 years ago, does not meet the current standard for front and side yard setbacks. Currently, the code requires that our side yard setback be 10 feet from our property line and our front yard setback be 14 feet from our property line. Our current side yard setback is only 7 feet and our front yard setback is 10, thus requiring us in a new build situation to diminish the width of our structure by 3 feet and move the footprint of the home rearward by an additional 4 feet. The solution we've received repeatedly from city officials on all levels is to remodel the home and the setbacks will become irrelevant. Being in the residential remodeling business as my personal career, this can be a viable option for many cases. Unfortunately for our situation, in my professional opinion, I believe that it is not for the following reasons. First, being that because of the age of the structure, the foundation was built from stone and is in considerable disrepair, causing the northwest corner of the house to be sunken considerably. Second, the exterior walls are constructed with unreinforced masonry, meeting neither shear or structural bearing requirements. And thirdly, the property currently lies in a FEMA-determined AE flood zone due to its proximity to the river. After acquiring a flood survey and verifying with a development review manager at the Department of Public Utilities, it has been deemed that the current footing must be raised almost 24 inches to meet the pertinent flood zone requirements. Because of the aforementioned reasons, we are attempting to build a new home to meet the new standards and provide a revitalized, safe, and aesthetically pleasing home that can be an asset to the community rather than a blight. To address the negative recommendations from engineering and transportation, specifically on the 4th South side of the property, as stated in the staff report, there are no formal plans that are currently proposed to extend the 400 South Viaduct Trail past 900 West. Although if they did, which was the concern from the two departments, it would still be able to proceed even after the 5 feet inside the sidewalk was vacated to our property. The reason being as follows. The sidewalk on 400 South is 4 feet wide that sits next to a park strip of 6 feet, then 11 feet of parking space and 6 feet of bike lane before the first lane starts. That totaling 27 feet, that's not including the 5 feet of land that we are requesting. If the city decided to widen the sidewalk to match the current proposal for the viaduct trail, they would only need 12 feet of space, leaving a remaining 15 feet before the first lane started. Another point to consider is even if the city wanted to emulate what's been done recently on 300 West with a double bike lane and a widened sidewalk with a park strip barrier from traffic, they would still only require 24 feet of space, still leaving 3 feet of extra space without the 5 feet included that we are requesting today. Just to be clear, I would fully support either of those options going on 4th South. In fact, I would enjoy that happening in front of my house. I think it would be a great asset for the city. But for all of those reasons, I would hope that you guys would recommend a positive recommendations for not only 11th West, but 400 South. I do believe that although the engineering and transportation department have good intentions for keeping right-of-ways open and available for the city to use, I do believe that this situation in particular can be a win-win for myself and also for the city. Like I said, I do support the idea of future development of wider walkways and even a connection between the Viaduct Trail and Redwood Road. I think that would be really great. It could tie into the River Trail and be a really great asset for not only walkers or bikers. I also do believe that if we were able to acquire the 5 feet of property, that would bring our current property into complete compliance with all of the setbacks and also allowable lot use current codes that we have, which is the main reason why we're here tonight, is to bring the current home into compliance so that we can tear down and rebuild without losing 3 feet of width on the property. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah. Excuse me. I think what's important is that red strip in front. If you look at the front of the houses here.
Will you get the microphone right?
Sorry. If you look at
to
the
you?
front of the houses, they're all in line with each other, right? And we want to recreate that with a new house. The only real structural change we want to make that you would see visually from the outside is to make the house a little wider. But we want to keep in plane with all the houses for a couple of blocks. There's only like 1 or 2 that are set back. So that's the purpose of that 5 feet. If we have that, then our setbacks, we can do that. Otherwise, we have to push the structure back. And that's what we don't want to do. So what we will end up with, if it was approved, is a house that's just a couple feet wider, and still the frontage would be in line with the rest of the houses. And that's our goal here, is to try and keep that consistency with the rest of the street. That's it.
Thank you. And Eric, I didn't hear you state your name at the beginning of so tell us who you are.
Yeah, Eric Sansom.
Thank you. Do the commissioners have any clarifying questions for staff or the applicant right now? It's not time to discuss the project, really. It's just to ask if you have a question that wasn't clear.
Yeah, for staff, I have a question about who did the disapproval. Yes, how was that done? Was that an administrative disapproval for setback variance?
The variance went to the appeals hearing officer.
Okay.
Held a hearing. The variance standards are quite strict, and ultimately was determined they didn't meet all of the requirements to be approved.
It seems to me that, maybe I remember this wrong, but I guess we don't have a rule where you can you can match this frontage of other houses on the street.
Right. I think that's part of what they were getting at. The requirement is the front yard is equal to the average on the block face.
Right.
And the block face, the definition is, all of the properties facing a block in between 2 streets. The river cuts through halfway, so there's actually more properties on the other side of the river that count towards that average.
Yeah.
And kind of threw it off. So what they were talking about is all of the immediate neighboring lots are all pretty lined up, but the entire block face has some variation. So if they had to rebuild with the average, they may actually have to be stepped back just a couple feet beyond maybe the next house.
So we're talking about a couple feet, potentially.
Yes.
Thank you.
So can I take a second just to add to that? So in both directions, 8 properties are all within 9 and 10 feet averages. There are 2 houses on the other side of the river that Andy mentioned. One has like a 57-foot front yard setback, and the other one has like a 27-foot setback. So those 2 houses are skewing the average of the entire block. And so although we are at 10 feet, which every other house is, those 2 houses are changing the average, which makes us have to comply with the 14-foot standard now, which is the average.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing for this item. If anyone wants to speak about this item, you can approach the podium. Or do we have any new emails or messages? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. So now we'll be in executive session, which means it's time for the commission to discuss and make motions and vote and that kind of stuff.
My only concern with this is that if we allow this property to have their front yard extended, then we have one missing tooth across the entire right-of-way. And while I think it seems illogical to have one house be required to step back 4 feet further than everyone else, I am concerned about giving up one single tooth that would then prevent the right of way to be able to be used to its full capacity. So if anyone has like some kind of way to rationalize through that kind of inconsistency, then I would love to hear it. It feels like a very tricky and unfair situation. So I would love to hear thoughts.
My thoughts are that what speaks to me is engineering's comments of a consistent right-of-way. When you look at the photo, you can see what they're talking about, and you describe it as a missing tooth. That consistency, I think, is valid in this particular case along 400 South. I also think this particular spot is also some continuity of the urban design, that we get some positive design elements or perhaps even future design elements by keeping the right-of-way along 400 South. That somewhat mirrors what you were thinking, but those are my thoughts.
I have a question for staff. So is everything that is not private property considered an alley? Because, like, I get that we're going to the alley vacation things for this, but like this isn't an alley, so it's conceptually it's hard for me to apply the concepts of how, like, why we vacate an alley to a 5-foot strip that's not what I think of as an alley.
Sure, yeah. So these are streets. This would be a partial street vacation. We do not have separate standards for alleys and streets, so when we review, we just use the alley vacation standards. But ultimately, it's a legislative decision. The city council has, in those cases, more discretion to vote yes or no, but we as staff use those just to have objective standards as we prepare our reviews.
Okay. I guess for me, I wonder, just because often the allocations come down to the lack of use, which is what the justification is in this instance, right? That's what we're citing, but I don't know how to quantify lack of use of that. So I don't understand. Yeah. So it's just I'm unclear exactly how to apply this in that case.
If I may add, we are working on the standards for alley vacation right now. We were directed by our attorneys to use the alley vacations because alley vacation and street closures, or both of them, kind of fall onto the same category under state law. And that's what we have in our code, the alley vacation standards.
I just always think that bike lanes should count as traffic lanes. And I don't know if, I don't think that you meant to say that it's not, but I just think bike lanes are space that's allocated for traffic and should be kind of respected that way.
I'm tending to agree with the staff recommendation, but I am concerned from the urban design perspective of a house sitting back another 5 feet from the houses immediately in its vicinity. And that is, for me, putting the house back where it is right now but wider would be, or where it is right now, the dimensions right now. And I don't know if there's any, and maybe staff can help on this, if there's any way to grant a setback in this particular request, or is there any way to grant a setback in any other request that they would come forward? Because the setback is just, it's not consistent with this particular neighborhood.
Yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. The averaging works when it's very similar along the block face, and sometimes we find these times where you do have odd outliers that push that back. Unfortunately, right now we don't have a tool because we couldn't do a plan development because it doesn't have enough size. I can tell you that we are looking at changing some of the R1 standards and specifically looking at that block face average because it has definitely punished some people, and I can see why you say, well, it does seem unfair. Or it can do the opposite, where all of a sudden somebody, because there's like 3 houses that are 3 feet away, now then you're pushing everybody closer too. So it works in both ways, but obviously it's more difficult in this situation. But so we are looking into it. I think the one thing they could do is if it's not like a complete tear down, like if they kept 25% of the front and then built back, they could retain that. But unfortunately, I think that's probably the only tool we have.
That's what I think that, no, sorry, can't speak right now. I think that they're choosing not to use a remodel because they may have very good reasons for it, but that is a way that they could keep that front lined up.
Madam Chair, I'm willing to make a motion.
Let's hear it.
Based on the information presented in this discussion, I move that the commission recommend that the City Council approve the request to vacate the portion of the right-of-way adjacent to 1100 West and deny the request to vacate the portion of right-of-way adjacent to 400 South.
I'll second.
Ooh. We have a motion by Commissioner Scheer and a second by Commissioner Barry. Any action on the motion? Okay, we'll vote. Commissioner Christensen?
Yes.
Commissioner Krasik?
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer?
Yes.
Commissioner Scott?
No.
Commissioner Barry?
Yes.
Commissioner Leverett?
Yes.
Commissioner Avila?
Yes.
Commissioner Barrett?
Yes.
I'm going to vote no. So that passes 7. So we'll make the recommendation the way that the staff has proposed. We make that recommendation to the City Council. There'll be another public hearing and vote there. Thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is a zoning administration text amendment. If you'll introduce yourself and present your project.
All right, can you hear me? All right, cool. So I'm Mayara Lima, the zoning administrator, and this amendment is directly related to my functions, although it does impact our residents that use our code and our staff that tries to read it and apply it. And I'll go over my slides. It's warning, it's text heavy. You saw it in the staff report. I'll try to keep it simple as possible. So maybe I'll rush a little bit through some of the items. Let me know if you have any questions later. So this text amendment was initiated by the mayor on a request of Planning Commission and involved multiple sections of 21A. This is generally a cleanup of the code. We want to make sure the code is updated to our current practice and that it aligns with state code. We are following, state law, and will support staff in code implementation and help with transparency to the public. There are a lot of changes to the code, and I try to fit them into categories that would be digestible. Created 3 main categories. First one, updating the zoning review so it aligns with what we currently do. The second one is clarifying provisions that are related to how we interpret the code. And lastly, just a general cleanup of the code. So I'll go over each of those. Like I said, kind of briefly, and it might leave some questions that we can address later. So for updating the zoning review so it matches what we currently do, the 2 main ones is the elimination of the zoning certificate process and the update of Chapter 58, which is the site plan review. Those kind of go together because both of them are based on a review that happens, planning first, then building permits, then a license. And because of technology, we don't usually do that. We are able to do a review on a simultaneous process. So that has changed quite a bit. And it needs updating. The zoning certificate process was basically a documentation of any changes of land use on a property, changes of site plan that needed to be requested by an applicant, and helped us with record keeping. We currently just do those based on a permit on license when we do their inspections or their reviews, so we don't necessarily need that process. Chapter 58 is similar, but it does, some zones currently say you need a site plan review before you can even apply for a permit. So we think that that's redundant because we're going to do a zoning review anyway. And if they're going through a planning process, they're also going to have a zoning review. So we're updating that to match what we have, what we currently do. That helps staff know what they need to do, and for transparency, there are also some tweaks related to state code, which limits what we can require on a site plan for residential development. So we have updated that as well. We're removing the development review team as a decision-making body. The DRT is an advisory group. Several members of departments in the city participate in those to help our clients or our customers with the permit process, but they're not making decisions. So we're removing that, removing from the code, and designating the appropriate staff for when they are cited. We're clarifying the zoning authority. Right now, the planning director is not listed as an authority, although it does say that the planning official is the person responsible for administering the code. So we're cleaning that up and having the planning director as the role of administering the code and having designated staff like the zoning administrator if necessary. And then cleaning up the appeals chapter, which is a little confusing. I'm not going to go over those, but if you have questions later, we can talk about that. So just to kind of show a little bit what the zoning certificate and Chapter 58 kind of look like, the one on the right side, the blue one, is what the code requires. So right now, so it would be if someone is submitting a planning application, like a plan development design review, we would do a site review based on current code. Then the applicant would have to request a zoning certificate, then we would do a zoning review, and then they could apply for a building permit. We want to remove that and just focus on the building permit application. Sorry, my slide, I mentioned it wrong. These two are actually what the current code says. So if there is a planning application, they do a zoning review, building permit application. We want to just keep it there. You don't need to read this. This is what I meant about the zoning authority. The blue one is what we currently have. It starts with zoning administrator, then it jumps to building or planning official, then it talks about the director, and then it talks about staff person, and it's not really clear. So what we're doing is what's on the left side, starting with planning director, their responsibility, then designation to zoning administrator and staff.
So can I ask a question about that, please? So there's a lot of administrative reviews, and so what you're saying here is that all of these people have the ability to make a decision on an administrative review.
In some sections of the code, it keeps to the planning director. So for example, the planning director can decide on a administrative plan development. It could be delegated to staff, if so be it, based on this.
So anything the planning director could approve can be delegated to somebody else on the staff?
Yes, which is kind of what we have now.
Yeah, I know. I just want to point that out as potentially something. Is that what it has been in the old code or not? I know it is what you do. Is it in the old code, in previous code?
The current
existing code, yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the current code is, it just says the planning director has the primary responsibility of administering the code, and they could delegate to the zoning administrator.
But not approvals.
No, but that's how we do it, and we're trying to match what we're doing. And even zoning administrator roles can be delegated to staff.
So this is really a kind of an important question. So it seems to me that the intent of 21A.06 now is that that the role of these officials is to enforce the title, not to make decisions about interpretation or anything like that. Is that incorrect? I mean, that's what that intent of the current
Part of administering the code is interpreting the code. Maybe I'm not understanding the question.
It was my impression that the planning director and all of the other planning staff could make final decisions about planning, final decision making.
If delegated by the planning director, yes.
Okay. Is that the way it actually is written now?
No, it doesn't say. It says.
So the planning director has kind of usurped that authority over time. Just being me, sorry.
I think the idea is we have become large enough that the planning director can't make all decisions.
But
if
even
the decisions
the
are
planning director
practical.
is not delegated to make decisions under the current code.
They're not delegated to make decisions.
Does it look like it?
Well, if you're administering and enforcing the code, and the code mentions making decisions, then.
All right.
Sorry.
It is a kind of an issue of who has the authority to do what.
So we would have sections in the code where it would say, for landscaping, for example, it mentions the zoning administrator has the authority to waive certain things.
Well,
or the planning commission.
That's the new proposal.
No. That's in the code right now.
Okay.
So let's say administrative design review, it does say the planning director has the authority to decide on an administrative design review.
Okay, thank you. That's my.
So, Ms. Lima, can you go back one slide, please?
Yes.
So I just want to be clear, it feels like the site review and the zoning certificate application are really kind of being eliminated. That, you know, in just in terms of steps, that what you're proposing is there's an application, a zoning review, and then it goes for building permit application. So the process feels like it's got 2 less steps and it's a little bit faster. That's what you're after, correct?
Yes, and that's what we currently do, because the other one on the blue box is redundant.
Right.
We have a site review 3 times.
Okay, so then just to be clear, the DRT is still there. They're just not, they're not making decisions. They're
Right.
still advising the applicant, but not making decisions.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so moving into the clarifying of provisions related to code interpretation, we do have 2 processes that are fairly similar. One is the administrative interpretation, and the other is the determination of a nonconformity or nonconforming use. And they can get confused. They do have different fees in our fee schedule, so I think it's important to clarify in the code why they're different. The administrative interpretation is someone wanting to know how a certain standard applies to the property or to their situation. So that has a lesser fee. It's us clarifying something that's not clear enough. And the determination of a nonconforming use is someone wanting to determine if, the use of their property or if their structure is legal and is allowed to continue the way it has been used. So we're clarifying those two processes so they keep it separate. The administrative interpretation that changes to that process is clarifying also that those have to be site-specific. There's a little bit of that already in there. But to avoid writing code, which is a legislative process, we are tying it to how a standard applied to a specific property on that specific question. We're also adding certain provisions for unlisted uses. So if one use is not listed, it's a new use. It's not listed in the land use table, what the process is. We currently do those with administrative interpretation to find a use that is similar. But in the last legislative session, they added some specific things that we need to add, including what the process is if we don't find a new use. So that would be requesting a zoning text amendment and having the council decide on that. There are other things with the determination of non-conforming use, like the abandonment, what that entails. Right now, it's kind of under just non-conforming use, although it applies to structure as well under state law. It's kind of hard to separate a structure without the use if you're talking about abandonment. So we're kind of relocating some things there. We're not really changing how we do business. And then adjusting some definitions and standards, just some minor corrections for what it means, what a non-complying lot or a non-conforming use or a non-complying structure actually means, and how the standards to certain modifications apply to them. And then what I already mentioned, the separation between administrative interpretation and the determination, which is administrative. The administrative interpretation is usually like, is a land use allowed, or how a setback applied to me? It's more specific. And then the determination of non-conforming affect land uses, structures, and lots. And then moving on to the cleanup and updating, the main things are we're replacing the term lot and bulk, which is an old term based on just regulations of height and setbacks, to development standards, because a lot of times we're talking about design features, other things that are required, or design standards like glazing. So it's not just about lot and bulk anymore. One example would be HLC has the authority to modify lot and bulk regulations, but that has expanded because HLC is also focused on the design. So they do have current authority to modify design standards, but we want to make clear that that doesn't go away, because that's the point of their review. We're also listing design standards as a type of zoning regulation. We have introductory provisions in the code, and we talk about these basic standards that zoning regulates, like setbacks, and we do not speak of design standards, although design standards have been in our code for a long time. So we're adding that just to make it clear that that's something that zoning regulates. We are updating some home occupation standards based on an exemption by state law in 2017. It just basically exempts home occupations that don't create an impact from paying for a business license. Our business license division doesn't want to have a business license that doesn't need the fee, so we're exempting them from getting those. That would be basically like having a home office or anything that anyone could be doing on just a residential use. We are adjusting some recently adopted language just to clarify the intent. So things like the rooftop, allowance of rooftop that we just had an amendment maybe a year ago or so. We had a few questions about it, so we decided maybe we should, include that just to make it clear. And then for the last part is just deleting things in the code that are obsolete or we don't use. The AG20 zoning district is not mapped. It's in there. We're removing it. It's not going to affect any property. The Character Conservation District is also similar. We created that chapter in 2013, but we haven't created any of those districts. We have another option, which is creating a thematic, forgot the name, thematic district. So it's very similar. We don't need two processes. And just removing reference to special exception, that's kind of lost in there. We don't use it. The last part is just adding seasonal farm stand, which is being removed with the MU consolidation from the land use tables. And then we're just making it clear that those are allowed as temporary uses. Yeah, I already mentioned this, so just to clarify intent, the white part on the left is the one I'm mentioning, the rooftop, just clarifying, and then the attached garage is just, we have a conflict on one section where we mentioned the 5 feet, where we said 5 feet or more, and then the one we say up to 5 feet, so it kind of overlaps a little bit. And then one of the example of an obsolete provision is for recycling stations. We have a lot in there that overlaps with other sections of the code that also regulates screening of dumpsters and recycling collection stations. So just cleaning that up a little bit. Just a couple considerations. It's in your staff report. So we do have issues that we need to address because of state law. So some of those things we will have to comply regardless of this text amendment. Some of those, like the home occupation, we have been doing that since 2017, even though our code says every home occupation has to have a business license. The second one is that process, removing the zoning certificate and how we do the zoning review and approval. So just keep in mind that that involves other departments if we're changing how we're doing the zoning review, because it's we're doing it simultaneous review, and it also involves the limitations of our software systems. So those are just two things to keep in mind. We are recommending to forward a positive recommendation to City Council, and that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. We're going to hold questions because there's not a separate applicant. So we'll do the public comment period now. I'm going to open the public hearing. If anyone would like to speak on this item, you're going to approach the podium. No. Okay. Any new emails or anything? Okay. So I'll close the public hearing on that. Yeah, this is a legislative item, so we'll just make a recommendation to the City Council. We'll start with my question first. In this section 21A, it's at the bottom of page 34 of the staff report. It's a notification to recognized organization. That entire section is stricken, but I wonder if it's moved or something, or if you're just not notifying the organizations, the community councils about these non-complying decisions anymore.
Yeah, that was a decision to remove it. Most of the time, I mean, we've been doing that. We do send, if it's a use-related determination, we notify the community organization. We just send them a copy of that letter. We haven't gotten any sort of feedback or sometimes they're just confused of why they're receiving those. So it was just a decision that maybe it's not necessary. It's also, if it is considered a non-compliant structure or a non-conforming use under state law, they have the right to continue to use it. So we just didn't think that was necessary.
That's a notification after the decision has already been made, right? Anyway?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Anyone can ask any questions?
Sorry, I have a couple of questions. I saw, I was reading through the Department of Review team, site plan review, those things sort of shifted around and changed based on the way you're operating now, right? This is reflecting a change that's already happened from an operating standpoint.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so the general public or developers will be totally aware there's no impact to them going forward.
No, actually, following what we have in the code would be a much longer process.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that whenever I see a staff report with that much code, I am always very grateful to the competent members of the city planning staff who actually get to do that work. And yeah, I'm happy that I'm not having to do it.
Thank you.
We also get help from our city attorneys as well on that stuff, so it's not just planning staff.
Yes, also the city attorneys.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion.
Okay.
And this is for PLN PCM 2025-00164. Based on the information presented and discussion, I move that the Commission recommends the City Council adopt this request.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Barry and a second by Commissioner Christensen. Any discussion of the motion? Okay, we'll vote. Commissioner Barrett,
Yes. Yes.
Commissioner Barry,
Oh, yes.
Commissioner Krasik,
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Vella,
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer,
Yes.
Commissioner Leverett,
Yes.
and I also will vote yes. So that will go to the Salt Lake City Council next, and they'll have a hearing and another vote. All right, we have no more business on our agenda. Our next meeting is June 11th, so we'll adjourn for now. Thank you.